For about a year now, I have kind of lived and breathed IBEs. So performed a few myself, talked about them, and as he said, it's really the foundation for everything that we talk about going forward today. So we'll open up with this. So another way to look at IBEs is asset identification, right? Kind of a quick little backstory. We took a internal class and it was kind of about communicating, right? We have a lot of things in our head that we can pass off to you guys, and it's how do we do that? And so my topic that I gave a speech on was IBEs, and it was pick your topic and give us 3 things that you're gonna teach us about that topic. And mine was identification, identification, and identification, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're identifying your assets, we're identifying where they're at in their life cycle status, we're identifying where they're at in your plant. It's all about identification. And you may be asking yourself, or maybe not, why should I be concerned about asset identification? So on the why, spares. I think Jeff kind of touched on that a little bit, but spares, something happens in the plant, something goes down, it's never at a good time. Do we have spares? Do we have the spares that we need, right? That's a big thing that we're always thinking about, as well as obsolescence. So this item goes down, not only do I have a spare, but is it a current item that I can buy right now? A lot of times some items will go discontinued and you can still repair them, but you need something to get back up and running right now. And we always think how much unnecessary downtime is caused by forced migration or your lack of spares, right? So you're down longer because you're trying to find a solution. It just takes time, right? Instead of going to the storeroom, grabbing the part out that you need, putting it into service and back up and running, you have to take more time to figure things out. So a little stat here. So it's estimated that about $65 billion worth of automation systems are nearing their end of life status. So end of life, in terms of what we'll talk about today, is a discontinue date has been announced, and then once it's discontinued, you can't buy those items anymore. And then know your cost of downtime. So estimated that 40% of unscheduled downtime is caused by aging equipment. We see it all the time. This drive has been in here for 15 years or 20 years. We've never had a problem out of it. And then all of a sudden, here it goes down. And we don't have a plan in place to get us back up and running when something happens to it. A couple questions that we always ask you guys, and I think they're always good to kind of get the juices flowing in terms of thought, is do you have an updated complete bill of materials for your critical assets? Could be yes, could be no. We hear a lot of no when it comes to that. But do you have an accurate plant model that identifies all your assets within your plant? So it's kind of along the same lines, but do you have the layout of your plant where each item is, where you need to know where these items are? That's what we always like to ask as well. And these are all things that the IBE is going to help you identify. Do you know which parts have been announced for discontinuation or that are already discontinued? And do you know which parts are still being manufactured? Which kind of goes hand in hand with the last point there, but just kind of like I said, getting us on the right thinking path here for these IBEs. And do you have a efficient and accurate process for maintaining your storeroom inventory? So, do we have someone that keeps track of that? Do we have tabs on what we have, what we've used, and what we may need to migrate, right? And do you have the right spare parts if a critical machine goes down? So machines that we identify as critical, of course, we want to make sure we have what we need. In the event that something happens, we can keep things running as we need them to be. Question you may be asking yourself at this point is, where do you start your asset management journey? And as we've kind of laid out, we start them with the IBEs for the identification. First thing that we do with IBEs is we collect data. We go throughout the plant and we collect data that is actionable, that you can manipulate when it comes back in your reports. And it helps you for modernization. It helps you to know what you have, what you don't have, and it gets you thinking, okay, this is where we need to focus in our plant. This is where we need to focus on a part level. It all starts with that data collection. And this is an example of a couple reports that'll come back. Kind of small here, a little tougher to see, but we'll take a better look at them later. Gives you some graphical representations of where your items are in their life cycle status within your plant. So this is going to be more like a whole plant level here, and then this is going to be on like a location basis. So part of how we outline your plant is by area, location, machine, panel, and then you have your assets within each panel. So it's very clearly lined out. So when it comes to an IBE, there's 4 levels of which we collect data. So level 1 is your Rockwell repairable items only. So for an example, your HMIs, your PLCs, your drives, your servos, motion controllers. Level 2 is the same, except we pick up third-party items there, which can be non-AB, right? If you have Toshiba drives or whatever else you may have that may not be AB. Level 3 is Rockwell comparable, repairable, and consumable items. It includes the above reparables, but we add sensors, relays, switch gears. We get a little more in depth with that. Level 4, kind of going with the same, it's Rockwell and third party, so we will collect the repairable and the consumable assets within that report. And this is kind of talking the same we went over last slide, but this is actual screenshot, and it kind of gives you a little bit more in depth of what's collected under each level. But yeah, typically the level 2, those are the parts that are a little bit harder to get too, right? Sometimes the relays and stuff like that may be a little bit easier to get. We just want to make sure that we get the repairable items. So another thing that is an option with IBEs is the My Equipment. So an IBE is basically a static report for a point in time. That report is run at the time of collection, and this is what the life cycle status of your items are at this point in time. You may also make changes after this report is run, right? You may update a panel. You may move some machines around. The last IBE I did, they had some labels on a panel, and it was from another line, but it was no longer that line. They had moved it, renamed it. You can do these things through My Equipment, and we'll go through this, but it basically makes this IBE a living document that you can go and edit. And it updates your life cycle status automatically itself too, so you can follow along better. Instead of having a static report, this makes it a living document. And we kind of go into that here. So under the My Equipment, you can access the life cycle reports, which, like I said, update. So if something was active or active mature, and let's say it's gone end of life, that will update within your My Equipment report. And it's all on a dashboard that you can go in, log into, and see as well. Access your storeroom information. So if you guys have gotten rid of some information that's in the storeroom, the biggest thing there is we see in the storeroom a lot, there's parts in the storeroom that are no longer in the install base. So we don't need to carry them in our inventory anymore, right? And so we go through and you guys may take a look at that and say, well, let's just get rid of it. So you can actually go in there, get rid of those items that were collected in your storeroom and update them with the new items that you've decided to carry now. And your facility. So if you add a new line or you take a line away, you can actually change that within your report too. So you can delete areas, locations, or machines, or add them, either way that you need to do it there. You can actually get firmware on some of your equipment. This comes with the My Equipment Digital. So My Equipment Digital is another service that basically anything that's on the network, right? We plug in and we go out through the network. It sends us back the information of the items that were on the network, and their firmware is included in that. So if you do that report, you will get the firmware on your items as well. And product alerts. So any kind of product alerts that come up, they will show up in your My Equipment dashboard. And like I said, we'll go through this a little bit later as well. And the My Equipment self-service, that's where you really make all your changes. So in your dashboard, you'll have a place to access your actual report, and then you'll have what's called a self-service tab, and the self-service tab is where all the actual changes are made. And what we're going to do is actually go through an IBE demo. This is just kind of a little picture there to show what some of that looks like. There's basically 7 sections to the report of an IBE, and this is the first one. The first one's kind of a PowerPoint. I always say it's kind of one that you can use to scare somebody if you need. It puts a lot of numbers into perspective of the data that was collected. So brief agenda there, just a baseline summary, inventory analysis, life cycle, your conditions, and also talks about My Equipment in here as well. So it gives you a number on how many individual parts that are collected within the collection process. So this is just a sample. I think this is dated 2020, so some things that are in here as active are probably no longer active. We'll see as we go through it, but this particular one, there was 1,825 parts that were collected. So it gives you a breakdown of what is Rockwell, what is non-Rockwell, if you have a PMA, which is now Inventory Plus, what items are in that Inventory Plus, and then stash areas. So, there's closets that have some parts in them sometimes, there's some offices that have some parts in them sometime, and as long as we're told about it and we can see it, we try to collect those, and then we just put them in a stash area because they're not technically in the storeroom, but it is inventory that you do have on site. So that's how they kind of break that out there as well. Gives you a breakdown of the panels that we collected, how many storerooms, as well as those stash areas. So when we look at the inventory analysis that we'll get to after this is some of the terminology that they use. So active inventory is basically inventory that is active within your install base, and you have it in your storeroom, and all is good there, right? We have spares in the storeroom. It is out there in our plant. Excess active would be inventory that you have in the storeroom that is in your install base, but let's say you have 1 installed and 10 in the storeroom. This report's going to deem that you probably have, 6, 7, 8 too many in your storeroom, a little bit in excess there. Inactive, so you have this item in your storeroom, but we do not see it anywhere in your install base and what we collected. Insufficient inventory, hey, we saw this out in the install base on the plant floor, but we do not see any of these in inventory in your storeroom. Spare inventory, so just a controlled area that you have some spare inventory. So this could include stash areas as well, and then stash. Those kind of go hand in hand there. They give you an overview here, and this is all a list price value of what is in your facility. So installed, they will give you a number here. So here it happens to be 4 million. Spares, 466,000, and then what's in your stash area. So this just gives you an overview of what you have and what at a list price dollar value that is. So for the non-Rockwell, they're not Rockwell items. They don't sell them. We don't know exactly what the prices on these may be. They give you a number of how many you have. So between your storeroom and your install base, you have 55 items that are non-Rockwell, at least for the sample report, right? They're all going to be a little different. Sometimes there are some unverified items. So typically we can find just about everything that we're going to collect within the software that we input the data into. Sometimes we have to add it. And sometimes when we add it, that information is not verified by Rockwell, right? They don't know what it is. They haven't had a chance to verify that. They still include it in the report, but they just put it under unverified. So this is your inventory status of spares. So this goes back to that inventory analysis terminology that we talked about just a minute ago. So this is all your spare parts. So they give you a value. That green doesn't really show up on that white background well, does it? They give you a value of your spare inventory in dollars, right? Active, which was what we said we have on the install base and we have in the storeroom. This is good inventory. These are good spares. Excess active is, we're deeming that they have $185,000 worth of excess inventory in their storeroom. Again, you go back to that. We have 1 installed, but we have 5 or 6 or 7 in the storeroom. It may be a little bit overkill for what we need. And then inactive. So here, but it's showing 137,000 worth of inventory that's no longer in the install base, but we are still carrying it in the storeroom. And we see that quite a bit. In the IBEs that I've done, there's always a figure there for inactive, right? Things just linger around. Those 1305s we were talking about, they have a tendency to sit on the shelf, right? Here is your recommended spare inventory value. So we told you that we'd tell you if we didn't see that you had any spares within your storeroom that was in your install base. So Rockwell says here for this particular IBE that you have 248K of good spare inventory, but we believe that you lack 680K, which is, like I said, a list price figure of crucial spares. And this can come from a number of things. Typically in an ideal world, you'll have 1 spare of everything that's in your install base, right? I mean, just to have 1 would always be nice, right? If this goes out, we know that we have another to go back and put in its place. This is the same figure here. They also include stash here. So for some reason in the last one, they don't put stash in there. This is just including the stash inventory as well. And then this is your non-Rockwell. So they also look at your non-Rockwell install base and storeroom quantity and recommend what they believe that you should have. Same with the Rockwell. So here in this particular case, they believe that you're an insufficient 17 items for that non-Rockwell inventory. Another part of the report that we've talked about is the life cycle status of the items within the install base as well as the storeroom. So a lot of it's color coded, and when we get into the Excel reports, you'll see this too. Dark green is an active product. This product is good. We can still buy this product. It's not in danger right now of going obsolete. Active mature, so this product is still supported. You can still buy this product, but there is a newer option available, right? So there's a latest greatest product out that may do the same thing that you could also use, but you can still buy the product that you have now. End of life, those will be yellow. So it's basically a discontinuation date for this item has been announced. So it's coming. So we need to start thinking about what we're going to do with these items that are yellow within our install base. Discontinued will be red. This item's no longer made. So it's no longer made or manufactured. Sometimes there are some cases where you can still repair these or exchange these, but that's where we start looking. We really need to make a plan for going forward, right? So when we look at it later, I'll make sure that I show you, but there's a box in your dashboard for My Equipment, and it'll tell you what life cycle statuses have been updated within the last 30 days. So it gives you a 30-day kind of running total as to what's changed in that status over the last month. This is basically that information, your life cycle status in a graph, right? This is of the entire plant. So it's telling you what is active mature, what's end of life, and what's discontinued. It's not all that shocking to see this sometimes. Now, we do see some that are really green, some that are really red, right? But we don't know until we go out and collect the data. If you have 820 parts that are discontinued and the graph kind of looks like this, then we definitely need to be, looking at upgrading, migrating, and using this data to start planning, right? So when we do these, we come out and we read this information out, right? We go through it with you. And I was sitting there with a plant manager, and we pulled up this page, and it looked a lot like this. And he said, "Holy cow." He said, "I never would have thought this." He said, that just shocks me, right? He doesn't go in the panels every day. He doesn't know. Same thing here for your non-Rockwell. So we're in rough shape here too, right? We're about 67% of our non-Rockwell is discontinued. And then here's where some of that unverified will show up. So there's one item we're not sure of that we collected. So what they do, talking about that hierarchy that we lay the plan out into, area, location, machine, panel, they tell you where you're at risk by locations. And so what this is your obsolescent parts based on location and the number of those parts that you have in those locations. So from a planning perspective, we can look at this and go, okay, biscuits processing is kind of in rough shape, right? If I'm looking to make some changes here, I probably want to look at biscuits processing first as a location. 236 items, 19 are end of life, so we're getting to a rough spot there. So when we do the reports, we always ask that there's somebody that's knowledgeable of the plant go with us when we do this. So as we're going through, hey, which area are we in? We'll make a note of it. Which location is this? And we'll make a note of it. And the thing is, we want it to be identifiable by whoever is going to read this report. So, if everybody calls it this, but the name on the panel may be something different, then we'll go by what you guys tell us to, right? The data that's input as far as your locations, machines, and all that are what we are told from you guys so that it's as accurate as it can be. This drills it down a little bit further. So as we say, this data is very manipulatable. So you can look at it from locations or from machines or from individual panels. They drill it down a little bit further here by machines. So same thing, right? This is your end of life and discontinued count, but it's based on machine. So we come down here and we're like blender 1.4. We got 60 discontinued items within this machine. Same deal like Andy said, that may not be a big deal to you guys. That machine may be going away. So, at least you have a list here of your top discontinued machines that you can start to look at and start prioritizing. This is your top discontinued parts that we didn't find any spares for within your storeroom. So in this particular case, a 1771 DCM, you show 16 of them on your plant floor in your install base, but we didn't find any in your inventory. So if something happens to one of these, this is a part we can't buy new anymore. We need to at least have a plan in place or be thinking about what we're going to do. Like I said, on these discontinued, repair options or exchange options are sometimes available, but that might not be something that we want to plan for. So while we're out collecting this data, it's a physical collection, we will take panel conditions, right? So what does the environment around the panel look like? What does the environment inside of the panel look like? There's fans there, are the fans clean, like it's getting good airflow? Or is it really dusty and the fan can barely move, right? Networking, does everything look good with the structuring of the cables there? Voltage and arc flash, we look to see if arc flash labels are there. We make note of that if they're not and if they are. And then wiring, some wiring's really nice and tidy. Some wiring looks like a rat's nest. It happens. We just make note of that. And when we do it, if we mark needs attention, we have to put notes in there. So if we mark needs attention, we put notes in there and tell you exactly what we saw and what we see that may be an issue within this plant. And that's with any of these. So if we mark a note in any of these, you'll be able to see that in your report. This is just a graphical illustration of those panel conditions, right? So this sample IBE, while it was in a very discontinued state, their panels were in pretty good shape. Like I said, we mark needs attention. So in this particular report, one needed attention. A couple of 29 of them had a fair environment. You know, it could have been a little bit dirty around the panel, could have been a little dusty inside the panel, but nothing to where we felt like we needed to make a needs attention note, right? There was only one of those there. As we talked about, we collect the storeroom inventory, and we go through, not only take the inventory of the parts, but we take the condition of the parts when we inventory them. So good, parts are sealed in box. It looks like the factory label is still sealed. Everything looks good, hasn't been used. Open package, you know, maybe the seal is cut on the box, but everything else looks good. You know, I always think about like the little slick cards. You know, they come in a bag. Maybe that box is cut, but the bag's sealed. So it's open, but everything looks to be good. Questionable, we don't know. That part may have been used, it may not. The thing I like to use for that is there's no bag, there's no box, the part's just sitting there. It doesn't look dirty, it doesn't look used. We may mark that as questionable because we just don't know. And then used, sometimes you can obviously tell when it's been used, right? It may be dirty, or it looks like it's been dropped, or it's not in its box, it's not in a bag, so we'll mark that as used as well. And then other, as far as we go, you will never hardly see other marked. We can typically fit it into one of those 4 other conditions. And this is a graphical illustration of that, right? So you can look and see how many were marked good, how many were marked open, used, or questionable. Blank is they didn't mark anything, but we always mark what condition each part is in. So you're uncontrolled. Always kind of think about this as like from a stash perspective. That inventory is not really controlled, right? In a storeroom, it's more controlled. It may be locked up, or you have a storeroom attendant or some sort of system in place to track that inventory. This is where they kind of put it in there. You know, it looks like all of these items in this stash inventory for purposes of this were used or questionable, right? So somebody may have used them, put them back in the stash, and there they sit. So a couple things, you know, some exclusions. Really, we don't typically collect servo motors on machine, because typically when we're collecting these IBE information, you don't have to shut the line down or shut the plant down in order for us to do this. Servos get a little trickier when it comes to that. And really, you know, if we have to go up a 20-foot ladder to collect it, a lot of times we may not do that, right? But it's all just a feel it out. And there's a life cycle planning application. So what this does is you basically tell this application what machines are critical to you. You can tell them what the downtime cost is, what the mean time to repair is, and it'll help you prioritize your facility based on the factors that you give it. And we can look at that a little bit later too. And my equipment, this is the same little screen grab that we showed earlier in the PowerPoint. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think we've talked pretty good about that. We'll show it here in a little bit. The data that we collect is the data that we collect, right? It's just how we organize it for your viewing, right? Throughout these 2 through 7 folders here. So we'll go through some of these. So 2A, basically a big thing to show here is it shows your installed quantity of each item, the recommended spares that we talked about that Rockwell will tell you, your storeroom quantity, how many we actually found, how many were in the stash areas, and then what Rockwell believes that you were insufficient. So the cool thing about this is, if, you know, we may not want to look at upgrading these machines yet, it's just not for us right this minute. You can look at your storeroom quantity. So let's say I want to see everything that I do not have spares for. You just filter this out to 0. We'll do this. And then now your report shows you everything that you don't have a spare for. To take it a step further, you could do that by life cycle status as well. So I want to look at what's discontinued and end of life that I don't have any spares for. And I know it had a bunch of discontinued right there, so it didn't change much. But now all we see is our discontinued and end of life items that I don't have any spares for. So we can drill it down that way as well. And there's a couple in here. I think they may have some excess spares too. But you can also, you know, do it however you want by insufficient spares, by what they deem that you have insufficient spares on. It'll match up pretty close to what you have a 0 quantity in the storeroom for as well, right? So this one's really just hitting on your spare inventory. And then it gives you, you know, if they deem that you're short in some spares, they'll give you a list price on what those items are to put into your inventory. So in this section 2, you'll see that there's a 2B. Same exact report, but that's for your third-party items. So it looks exactly the same. We'll look at it really quick. So you got your manufacturer. So in this specific one, if you just wanted to look at your, Emerson items, you just click on your Emerson there, and we've got one. So we can look at it, say, okay, it's discontinued. We may need to look at another solution, but we do have one in the storeroom, right? So this is one of those situations where we have one in the storeroom, but there's none installed. We're just kind of carrying it along here. Section 3 is your unverified. This is kind of how they list it out here. This is another one of those, the data is only as good as what's input. So it looks like in this scenario, sample scenario, the part number was put in on line 2 there as LGX chassis-10, which is not a Logix chassis part number, right? But what could have happened in a scenario world is that this part number was stuck on the side of that chassis, and so questions were asked, and it was just put that in there, right? So you'll still get that out, and we can infer from that it's a Logix chassis, a 10-slot chassis, right? So 4A, B, and C are nice PDFs that show graphical. So this 4A here is the entire site. So based on life cycle status, your red is your discontinued, dark green is your active, light green is your active mature, and yellow is your end of life. So it follows suit with what we've kind of talked about this far. I think we had a bar graph in the executive summary. Same information, 53% of this install base is discontinued. And then you go to 4B, starts to drill it down a little bit more. This is looking at our life cycle by location. So a lot like the other graph that we saw as well. It's a little small up there. Let me see if I can zoom it in for you a little bit. So it lists your locations out here. So biscuits processing, pancakes, etc. And it tells you how many items from an actual number and a percentage are at each stage of the life cycle status. So if you want to look down here some more, there's the graph that shows that. So for a quick look, hey, you get asked a question, where are we most discontinued? Well, from a location standpoint, it's going to be biscuits processing, just as a quick look. A question follows that as, well, just how much? Well, 234 items, right, are in that discontinued status in this location. And 4C is going down to the machine level. So, blending, Blender 1.4 is just the top one there that we'll look at. It goes through the same thing. So this particular one, we don't have any active products. We've got 22 active mature, and we've got 60 discontinued. So we're either active or discontinued when it comes to Blender 1.4. And again, shows you a graph here for a quick look of, okay, I want to look at my machines, where are we showing the most risk of obsolete products? And we'll go to section 5. So this is a nice report. Depending on how many panels your facility has, it can be a lot of pages within this, but you can look really quickly. You can look really quickly down to each panel. So this is going down to the products that are actually in each panel, and they each have their own page. It gives you their part number, gives you a short description and how many of each of these are within this panel and the life cycle status. So if you just want to thumb through, you can page down all you want to, go through each of your panels, get a quick look at what the life cycle status of each of these panels looks like, as well as what exactly is in them. So if you start putting together panel proposals, this would be a good place to start, because you can just pull up the whole panel and have it right here. So this is 5D. So we get back into spreadsheet format here. So the question that was asked a minute ago is about drilling it down to specific areas or machines. This is a really good place to do that. So you can look here. This will have all your areas. If I want to drill it down by area, I can do so here. Locations, same deal. Machines, same deal there. Assets, for the sake of your spreadsheet reports, are going to be the panels, right? So assets are basically how your panels are laid out within this report when it comes to 5D. It'll also tell you can filter by what's installed or what's a spare. So if you want to look at just your spares, just your install base, you can do that as well. If you have a specific part number, so let's say for right here, this line 1, you have a 1771-A2B. That may not be what you guys show it to be in your system. So if you have your own part number for that, we can input that into the system when we do data collection. It will show up here as well. So you can filter by your part number, not Rockwell's part number. So we talked about, we take conditions, right? So this is where this comes back in a spreadsheet form. So they made some notes here. So in this particular panel, they noted it as fair, and they made a note to say that they found flour within that panel, right? So they just want you to know, hey, we saw this in there. Just might be something you want to take a look at. You know, there may be some of this getting in there. Might want to clean it out. You know, whichever. They make those notes just so that you know. It's like everything else was good, but this is your grounding, heating, cooling, networking, voltage and arc flash, and your wiring. Any notes will be beside of each of these columns that they find. So, you know, if it's a needs attention or fair, you'll get a note on exactly what the findings are. And 6B goes back to that storeroom condition report where we take each part. You know, is it open? Is it used? Is it questionable? This is where we note that as well. So we have a 1756L1 here on this line 5, and it was noted as open. So with these spreadsheets being so manipulatable, you can search your parts by their condition. So if we want to look at everything that's open or questionable, we can apply that out, and then here's all that information as well. They give you some list price on these items, and the replacement item shows back up here if that item is discontinued. Life cycle status is out here to the right. So, like I said, a lot of the data shows back up throughout these different reports. It's just how it's interpreted in each section here. And section 7 is life cycle planning. So Andy kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. We're kind of taking a step further on this report as ES&E. So you can filter this out the same way you can the others. Area, location, machine, asset. You have your customer part number. And then this has manufacturer. So this is not only Rockwell, this is Rockwell, third party. It gives you a description, any replacement options that are available, their life cycle status. So if you have a spare, it's just a quick yes or no here, right? So it's a Y or an N, and you can filter out by the no, right? If I don't have any spares, then I'll select no, and I can drill it down that way. Also tells you the repairability. So you can search by your repairable or your consumable assets within the panels. So the other thing we think is pretty cool about this is there's a tech segment filter. So, you know, if you got a controls guy that just wants to look at PLCs, you can just sort PLC, and then here's all your PLC stuff, right? So you can filter it out by each tech segment. There's some tech segments in there that, you know, you're not going to use and that aren't going to have anything in them if we do a level 2 versus a level 4, right? Won't be as much IC stuff in a level 2 as there would be a level 4. What we're doing as ES&E is we're taking a look at the life cycle status of your items and your machines as a whole. So this is where it comes back to, we take some of this information from you guys, as Andy said. You know, if we're doing this report and you say, hey, machine biscuits processing machine is a very critical machine for us. We know that it's a little obsolete. We need to make sure this is running. We want to know what we need to do for this machine. We have our specialists get together and they take a look at these machines, and they basically give you a full solution as they see it per that machine. So this is an example of one that we did. It was laid out a little bit differently. This is actually the packaging area as a whole. So when it comes to numbers, the numbers will get kind of big because they had case packers and there was 9 of them. So you do a solution for one case packer, you multiply that by 9, it can get a little large. But they go through. We had blueprint conveyors at one point, so they look at that. There was a panel view there that needed to be upgraded. They offered their solution part number to what was there, give a description of what that part is that they offered, and this is It's not a formal quote, but it's just a list price estimation of what this item would cost you. So same thing here. So I talked about those case packers. Here's the case packers. There was 9 of them. So from a full modernization standpoint of one of the case packers, these lines are what we feel that you would need, right? So they take into account motion, they take into account the PLCs, they take into account the drives, power supplies. Offer part number solutions, which is right here in product. Give you a description for each one of them. And then this would be, so net each would be based on doing one of the case packers, right? So about $19,813 list price is what we're guesstimating to do one case packer. This is extended across all 9 of them, right? So kind of taking some of the guesswork out of it and trying to take your guys' suggestions as to what you would like for us to look at and give you a solution that maybe you could get started on. Or at least have a game plan in place of where to go. Same thing here, D-Nester was what they called that. Looked at it, this is what we suggest based on what you have now. We believe this would work, give you, a rough price here, and then carry it forward. So as you see, this one was kind of a lot of work. This was kind of the packaging area as a whole. This data is very actionable, right? We want to help you go ahead and get a plan going. When you have 100, 200, 300 or more panels, there's a lot of information that comes back, and sometimes it's like, where do I start? And we try to help you get started with solutions, from the get-go here. So we have it here. If you have a My Rockwell account, this is where it shows up at. As you come in here, part of what you got in here is your My Equipment self-service. So as we kind of talked about, self-service is where you go make the changes, and that's kind of the big thing that we've been talking about is the changes. So if we start migrating, we start updating, this is what we want to do. So we get in here. So it pulls up like this. So it starts with all of your areas, right? So Griddle 45, let's just say that that's an area that we want to look at. We can create a new area here at this point. So if we hit create, when we're under areas, we will create a new area. So let's say we added a new area within the plant, expansion, what have you. Well, let's just, for the sake of this, let's drill down on Griddle 45. And let's go to the locations that are under Griddle 45, which is pancakes. So you have the same option here. You could put a description in there. You can rename it here. You can rename it here. You could create a new one, or we can continue to drill it down. Everything that you see will follow that hierarchy that we lay out within the plant, right? Area, location, machine, panel, and then items. So if we drill it down one more here, we go to machines. So you see we have 3 machines under here. If we add a new machine to this, we can create right here and we add that machine. Let's just look at the Line 4 Pancake Case Packer. Under the Line 4 Pancake Case Packer, we have 1 panel. If we wanted to add another one, let's say we put a new panel out there, we put a new HMI, something along those lines, we can create a new panel here. We can also continue to drill it down. So if we drill it down here at the panel level, here's where we get our devices and our components that are within that panel. So this is each one. 1756A17, A16, IB16, all these items are here. Why I think it's so important to get here is that if we start doing some migrations, we could wipe this whole panel out and we could add a new panel in with all our new stuff, or if we're not wiping that panel out, we're just making a change to a processor, we can pull that processor out here, add the new one in, right? You would add the new one in by create here, and here on your this little hamburger menu is kind of how you get to where you're going. You would just remove it right there. So you just pull that out, create the new item, and you're good to go, right? So and like I said, you can rename these at any stage. You can put them under a different machine at any stage, and you can add a description. It's, like I said, very easy to remove. If you go full page here on an actual item, I did this the other day. I'll see exactly what it comes back as. So you go to the actual item within the panel. It'll give you a little description. It'll actually give you its life cycle status. So when you're in My Equipment, that's updated, right? This report was 2 or 3 years ago. It's updated. If it's gone discontinued now, then it's going to say discontinued. As long as those parts are within the report and we could get the life cycle status on them whenever the report was generated, we can still get that life cycle status on them. Does that make sense? So as Rockwell gets the life cycle status information, it will update as well. So they, as time goes on, you know, everybody that has these other parts installed and their install base too, you know, they're running these reports, and that life cycle status on those third parties are getting updated as time goes on as well, just like the Rockwell stuff. So they will update with your Rockwell parts as well.
I'm kind of confused. So you're saying that the report, isn't the report generated from here, or, but this is your raw data, right? It's the life cycle data. That's the raw data is here. You type in here, you input in here.
You can, yeah. So this is where you can make your changes. So this, when you go into this for the first time, this is all the information from the reports that we went over before this, right? Yeah, so this is allowing you to make your changes. So let's say a year's gone on and we want to make some changes. We've changed our storeroom, or we've added a panel or taken a panel out. This is where we go in and make those changes as you guys, right? Because this is your subscription and this is your dashboard at that point. This is where we went into self-service here. The other part that you can go into is your install-based evaluation. Just like the spreadsheet reports were very manipulatable and you can filter however you want to, you can filter by, if you have multiple facilities, you can filter by those, or your areas, your locations, machines, all that hierarchy that we collected before. So if you just want to look at Griddle 45, you can nail it down there, and it'll nail it just down to Griddle 45. So there you go. So there's Griddle 45, right? Lifecycle overview of that area. So, and you can click on each of these, right? It gives you a total number count, what's discontinued, what's active, what's end of life. You can look at all of that here, and it gives you percentages, right? So it'll tell you exactly how many unique part numbers and how many total parts installed, and then what the spares are based on these as well. So your panel risk analysis, so that kind of came up in that first spread PowerPoint that we looked at. You know, what are we looking at from a panel level of how many items are discontinued? This will show you that as well. And you can back it out. So you can back it out to machines, tell your machine risk analysis based on life cycle status, location, as well as area. So it just depends on how far you want to drill down into it. It'll show you all of it though. And sometimes you know they won't all fit depending on the size of the report. So you got to kind of scroll across here, and you'll get to all your different areas, locations, or panels. Now this is where we said your life cycle status is updated with this, right? The IBE static report for the day that it was generated. This is a living dashboard at this point. So if you had parts that their life cycle status changed within the past 30 days, this is where it'll show you. So you had 82 parts that were updated. And click on that there, and then it starts to show you right here. And it's gonna, if you go back to your area risk analysis, it's gonna drill down to those parts that were updated. And there's your panel right there. And then your discontinued part numbers with no spares by area. So when you did the report, you know, there may have been 25 or 30 in processing plant 2 that were in this area that we didn't have any spares for, but now that the life cycle status has changed, maybe there's some more, right, of a different item that you need to be concerned about. So this gives you a little graphical. Yep. Your life cycle changes over time. Your recently updated parts. Here's your storeroom. Some discontinued parts. So there's your firmware. Let's take a quick peek at that. It may not, okay, it did have some in here. So that's kind of what your firmware dashboard's going to look like here. And it goes back into telling you what area and location and machine and panel here as well. The one thing I made a note on as I was going through this the other day I thought was cool, there was a drill through function. It's not on everything. It was in this overview here. I thought it was cool. You guys may have a different view. So this drill through, it was, you could drill down on a certain part, right, an individual part number, and it'll tell you exactly where that part is installed within the facility at multiple places. So, you know, chances are we're going to have, you know, an output card or something that's going to show up in multiple places. Well, this is going to tell you.
Cross-reference.
Yeah, exactly, and it's going to tell you exactly where it is. So, you know, CP1 engine room, we got case conveyor, we got all these different places that this is, and it shows it right here as well. So this is another one of those that you could export out, right? So just on a single part number basis, you just drill down to it, and that's that 1771 IAD. Yeah.
Nice, yeah.
I thought that was really cool. It tells you too the repairability, so it's repairable, life cycle status. It shows you, and you may have different series out there. So we collect that too when we can. So A, B, D, and then not a sign were found out there, but that's all based on that part number.